Time for a new channel series. Welcome to the first edition of This Day in History here on the GoodMicWork channel. What do you think? Not a bad idea, right? I wanted to come up with some sort of a new video or a new series to do here on the channel, and I thought of This Day in History would be very simple and very easy and a little bit quicker of a video that I could do, and I expect to give you guys at least a couple of these per month. I decided on this date almost 2 months ago when I first came up with the idea to do a new series here on the channel, and I thought that January 4th would be the perfect day to launch a series like this because some very memorable and history-making days took place in the wrestling business on this day of the year. It happened twice, 1999 and 2010. And usually when I launch a new series like my pay-per-view and DVD reviews and stuff like that, I like to do 1 or 2 videos right off the bat to start, and I thought since multiple things happen on January 4th, that will be our day. So if you're checking out my YouTube channel right now, I'm sure you noticed that episode 2 of This Day in History is also uploaded. So take a look at both, and these were some pretty history-making days. We're going to start with 1999. This was one of my favorite nights in the Monday Night Wars, one of the most infamous nights in history. Everybody looks back at this night as being one of the key factors of WCW's downfall. Probably one of the biggest backfires in the history of the wrestling business took place, as we know, during the Monday Night Wars on Monday Nitro. Tony Schiavone, Eric Bischoff, and others, did some really underhanded things to the WWE, including giving away the results of Raw whenever Raw was taped. Now, here we are in late 1998, early 1999, and Raw is still taping their shows every other week. Can you believe that? They had been winning in the ratings now for, close to a year. It was right after WrestleMania of 98 when they started kicking the shit out of WCW, and they really never looked back. And they were doing all of this damage. They were beating them in the ratings with taped shows. How amazing is that? I'm pretty sure the only times Nitro won in the ratings, once or twice after that Vince McMahon and Steve Austin confrontation on Raw when WWE finally took over, I think the only times WCW won after that was on taped Raws. So on this particular night, Raw was taped. Raw was actually taped the year before. It was taped, I think, December 28th or something like that of 1998. It aired on January 4th. Nitro was live, and this was the big night, the infamous finger poke of doom. WCW, in their head, said to themselves, okay, we're going to tell all the fans what's going to happen on the WWE show, and then we're going to swerve them on our show, and we're going to one-up the WWE's title change in our own way. Little did they know, the fans would completely fucking hate it. Now, I'm going to get into the finger poke of doom here in a minute, and a lot of my comments about it, you know what, I bet you are going to surprise you, because I do not say what everybody else says about the finger poke of doom. But what I will say is that this was such a perfect illustration of WCW's ignorance. Now, we'll start it out in WWE. Storyline-wise, what was going on in the company at the time, The Rock had just won the WWE title at the big tournament at Survivor Series. He defended the title against Mankind, I think the next pay-per-view that was named after him, Rock Bottom, right? You kind of thought the Mankind-Rock feud was going to be over with and done after they humiliated him at Survivor Series and after he lost again at Rock Bottom, but no, they would actually keep it going. These two guys would work the next 2 pay-per-views together as well, so the Mankind-Rock feud was fucking awesome. And on this particular night, it was really weird. They had briefly brought back in Shawn Michaels. If you remember, he came back in late 1998 to be the commissioner, and he was basically a heel commissioner. He had joined up with the corporation. And you could see that even back then, the WWE would have instances where they just changed their mind on shit. And it seemed like the Shawn Michaels commissioner angle didn't last long at all. And he only came back in as a heel for just a few weeks. He had turned against DX and joined up with Vince McMahon. And then just a few weeks later, Vince McMahon fires him on Monday Night Raw. This then prompts Shawn Michaels to super kick Vince McMahon. And Shawn Michaels, I guess now, is a babyface. Now you fast forward to this Monday Night Raw. So the night after, basically, Shawn Michaels was fired by Vince McMahon. They taped this particular Monday Night Raw. So basically what happens is Shawn Michaels comes out, I think, to open Raw. He's now a babyface again. The corporation is in the ring. DX actually comes out to join Shawn Michaels on the stage. He makes a bunch of announcements about the Royal Rumble because even though Vince McMahon, quote-unquote, fired him, according to storyline, Shawn Michaels' commissioner contract was ironclad and could not be fired. So he made a bunch of stipulations for the Royal Rumble, I think including telling Vince that he's going to enter at number 1 and Austin's going to enter at number 2 or vice versa. So he informed Vince on his fate at the Royal Rumble. And then he kind of high-fived with DX and left with all of them, leaving Vince McMahon in the ring dumbfounded. Mick Foley comes out later on in the show and cuts a promo. Vince McMahon joins him out on the stage and says, I'm not going to grant you a number 1 contenders match or a match with The Rock at the Royal Rumble or something like that is what I think Mankind wanted. Instead, he granted him a match with Triple H, with the winner becoming the number 1 contender for the WWE title. The guest referee would be Shane McMahon. Now, this is kind of a babyface match because Triple H and Mankind are, kind of buddies. buddies now. You know, they're both baby faces, they're kind of on each other's side, and they're both against the corporation, but they find each other having to wrestle for a number one contender match. And so Shane McMahon, the dirty referee for this thing, fast counts Mick Foley just a few minutes into the match, giving Triple H the victory on purpose. Triple H then attacks Shane McMahon. Mick Foley rolls him over into basically a submission move and says, I'm going to break your arms unless your dad gives me a title match against The Rock tonight. Shades of what Seth Rollins just did on Monday Night Raw a couple of weeks ago when he pinned Edge's neck to the briefcase. So very cool. Vince McMahon, of course, has no choice but to grant Mick Foley what he wants. He gets the match with The Rock in the main event of Raw. Now you switch back over to Nitro. This is a live show. I believe it's in the Georgia Dome. About 40,000 people there. WCW has mentioned several times during the show that Raw is taped. And then finally, Tony Schiavone opens up his big fat fucking mouth. And yes, I know that it was Eric Bischoff that gave him the orders to give away the results. I totally understand that. But it's still Tony Schiavone was the one that said it. And he's still just the tone of his voice. He sounded like a fucking douchebag. So even though Eric Bischoff gave the orders to do it, I really doubt Tony Schiavone had any problem at all fucking with the WWE, because I don't think he liked him any better than Bischoff did. And these morons actually tell the fans, hey guys, remember Mick Foley, better known as Cactus Jack, who used to work here in WCW? Later on tonight on Raw, he's gonna win their world title. And then he makes that snarky little comment like, ugh, that'll put a lot of butts in the seat. Well, yes, Tony Schiavone, of course it's gonna put butts in the seats. Everybody loves Mick Foley. Are you fucking stupid? You're talking about this guy as if he's some lowly piece of shit that nobody likes. Everybody respects Mick Foley for his awesome character and the amazing amount of punishment that he's taken throughout his career to entertain these fans. You know, you're going to talk down to him and make it sound like he's some piece of shit when you've got this big, stumbling, bumbling, bald, 45-year-old dickwad as your world champion who on his best day cannot have any better than a 3 out of 10 match. You're actually comparing those two? You know, that's fucking retarded. And what happened? 500,000 people tuned over to Monday Night Raw. So WCW basically advertised Monday Night Raw. Now, I know this is a strategy that has worked for them in the past. Back in the day when they used to give away the results of Raw, you know, it might have worked because Raw was still filled with enhancement matches and it was only an hour long, and sometimes, most of the time, nothing major would even take place. So if Eric Bischoff says, hey, Diesel beat Fatu, you know, nobody fucking cares. But now you fast forward a couple of years later, WCW still has that mentality of, oh, if we give away WWE's results, the fans aren't going to watch the show. Well, it fucking backfired because now Monday Night Raw is 10 times more exciting than it was when you were first starting to give away the results of these shows. And WCW should have fucking known better. They were already getting their asses handed to them by WWE as it was. They had completely turned the corner. You know, the WWE was just about to skyrocket into popularity and leave WCW in the dust. And then they go and pull some shit like this. This might have worked when WCW was winning in the ratings and everybody wanted to watch them. But, you know, WCW was losing steam. Fans were losing interest. It was getting boring. WWE was much more refreshing, much more new, much more hip. And the fans were already starting to gravitate to that show. So why in the fucking world would you advertise? You know, it's just so funny how dumb WCW was. They thought that because Raw was taped that nobody was going to care. And instead of nobody caring, everybody cared. And everybody tuned in to watch Mick Foley get his moment. You know, finally, you talk about a guy that deserves it more than anybody. Holy shit. After what Mick Foley had gone through that previous year, that was the year of the Hell in the Cell and all that shit. So Mick Foley was already worshipped by wrestling fans around the world. They were insulting Mick Foley. They were insulting the WWE, and they were insulting the fans of Mick Foley, and it was fucking bullshit, and they deserved what they got that night. And WCW's brilliance doesn't end there. They know the result of this show a week before, so they got a whole week to write Nitro and make it better than Raw because they know what's going to happen. So what do they decide to do? They decide to have a championship match of their own. And if WWE's going to have a title change, well, then we're going to have one too. But instead of a great match filled with all sorts of spots and drama and emotion like Mankind and The Rock, they have one of the dumbest matches in fucking history that involves a finger. The finger poke of doom. It's one of the most famous nights in wrestling history now because of what took place. When you watch what happened on WWE Raw, these morons in WCW know the result. They know what's going to happen, and this is the way they choose to write their show to compete with WWE's title change? A goddamn finger? Are you kidding me? So a week before this, just to set the stage for you, was Starrcade, right? Nash had beaten Goldberg, finally ended the streak with help from Scott Hall. Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, I think, were feuding at this point. The NWO, of course, had 10 million members by this point. It had split into red and white white and yellow and fucking purple, and they had all sorts of different NWOs. Scott Hall, I think, was on the opposite sides of Kevin Nash. He interferes in the main event, helping Nash beat Goldberg, and I think that basically reunites the two of them. Hulk Hogan, I think, was also on opposite sides of Kevin Nash at the time. And so they brought him back into Nitro, and I can't even remember the story now, but he was basically coming back in as a hero, as a babyface. He didn't even wear his NWO colors. He came out, and they set up the match with him and Nash later on, and they got in the ring, and they kind of paced around each other. Hogan is also almost wrestling in dress pants and dress shoes or something. I hated his outfit. You knew something was up. And finally, the two of them come together in the middle of the ring. Hogan just puts a finger on Nash's chest. Nash falls down. Hogan covers him. 1, 2, 3. Brand new World Heavyweight Champion. They swerved everybody, and the NWO is reunited. Everybody that I've ever listened to or heard talk about this situation has completely shit on it. One of the dumbest things WCW has ever done, and an insult to the World Heavyweight title. Now, here's where it might surprise you. I did not personally completely hate the finger poke of doom. Seriously, I did not. I didn't think it was that big of a deal to do what they did to the world title, because they would give it to David Arquette. You know, they used to spray paint on it, so it's not the only time they took a huge, fat, steaming dump on the NWA world title. It's been done a few times by the NWO. If anything, I appreciated the surprise and the swerve because I did not see that coming. My problem was I think the timing was bad because they were going up against Mick Foley winning the title, and all of the drama and all of the hard work that Foley put in to reach this point. I think it was bad timing. Had that angle taken place on another Nitro or on a pay-per-view or something like that, maybe it would have been better. So I'm going to kind of defend the finger poke of doom a little bit. I don't fault Nash or Hogan for that because really, I liked the swerve. The only problem I had with it is that the NWO was still so overblown. I mean, Steiner was out there, Luger was out there, they still had all those NWO members. What I thought would have been cool is if they went back to the original 3 members. Because when I saw Hogan do that to Nash and win the title, and Hogan, Nash, and Hall were all hugging, I'm like, wow, they're putting the old original NWO back together. Because by this point, they had added so many new members to it, they had split it up into different groups, it completely lost its value, it completely lost its meaning, and the whole NWO was pretty much pointless and was dying. It was a sinking ship. You could see that. So what I think would have been better is if the 3 of these guys reunited again and kicked everybody out of the NWO, you know, and just said, we're the only 3 guys, we're the ones together as a unit that can take over the wrestling business, we don't need anybody else. And you could see after all that infighting, after Black and White versus Wolfpack and all that shit, these 3 guys come back together to form the original NWO, Black and White, simplify it, get everybody else the fuck out of there, and maybe you could restart that war with WCW. And you could kind of start all over again. It's like you could, if you had to add members again, you could, but you could just start it over, you know, from the beginning. Everybody could be back on WCW's side. They want to take out Hall, Nash, and Hogan. The war starts over again, and then slowly guys start to turn and jump back into the group one at a time. To me, you know, those are the only things WCW creatively was capable of doing. To me, if they were going to reunite the NWO, that's the way to do it. But, you know, it turned into a mess. The fans did not respect it at all. They shit all over the angle. They hated what happened. And, you know, I'm kind of one of the ones that defended it just a little bit. I think it's hilarious that WCW made such a stupid decision on the same night that WWE made such a brilliant decision. I also think it's hilarious that these idiots gave away the results of Raw, basically telling 500,000 people to tune into Raw. I think all of that is great. I think all of that is hilarious, and it's such a great example of how stupid WCW was. But the actual finger poke of doom, I don't consider to be that bad. A lot of people say it devalued the world title. A lot of people say it's Hogan and Nash jacking off on the business and doing whatever they want. I really don't think it was like that. Nash, you know, a lot of people, I mean, he was the booker in WCW, don't forget, at the time. That's another fucked up thing, is you got an active roster member writing the fucking show. So he books himself to beat Goldberg, which Nash defends. And I kind of see his point. You know, he's like, it's not like I wanted the spot. It's not like I wanted to squash Goldberg and be the biggest babyface in WCW. I turned around a week later and handed the belt over to Hogan. I didn't even have a match for it. So it's not like he was trying to be on top. He gave the torch right back to Hogan, you know, the very next week. It's like Goldberg, they could have ran with him so much longer as World Heavyweight Champion. You know, if he wasn't champion and they just wanted to get the streak out of the way, I could understand it. I mean, it was Starrcade. This was their WrestleMania. If you're going to have a big title change or a big shocking moment, this is the pay-per-view to do it on. But Goldberg was so hot. He was almost matched in popularity with Stone Cold Steve Austin, and he's the WCW World Champion. To me, it was a little bit early to kill all of that momentum because he would never be the same again after that. I mean, ever. His great run was only about 6 months long, from when he won the world title up until the end of the year. I honestly believe they could have kept that title on him until the following Starrcade. Seriously, think about if they would have done that. Think about if the streak would have lasted until Starrcade 1999, and then someone ended the streak there. Maybe it would have been Bret Hart. Who knows? But hindsight is always 20/20. I'm a Kevin Nash fan. I really, I understand that you kind of have to do what you got to do in this business. You got to make your money, and Kevin Nash was in control. Of course, he's probably going to take care of himself, take care of some of his friends, but I don't think he was as big of a selfish piece of shit as people make him out to be. Here's my problem. I think people want Kevin Nash to be a selfish piece of shit. What they don't realize is this guy actually does have fucking smart business sense. He's a smart guy. He understands wrestling. He understands psychology. He understands purposes for doing things and shit like that. And I think he's somebody that actually, wants the product to be better, does what's best for the product, basically. That might not always be the case. Shawn and Hunter and Triple H and Scott Hall, those guys have fucked with some people's careers. I'm not denying that. But I don't think Kevin Nash is some evil political piece of shit. I don't believe he's that type of person. I don't believe he cares enough to be that type of person. Kevin Nash strikes me as someone that just wants to make his money. He's not interested in the limelight. He's not interested in the popularity. Maybe there was a time when he was. I mean, he did beat Goldberg at Starrcade. I totally understand that. He was the booker, and he booked himself to do that, so I can understand the argument. But I don't think he's as big of a political player as somebody like Hulk Hogan is. I don't think he's that manipulative. I think Nash is more of an everyday type of guy who probably truly tried to get along with everybody. A lot of people that even don't like the Clique all said they like Kevin Nash. Some of the biggest Clique critics out there have all said that Kevin Nash is a pretty cool dude when he's on his own. So I'll be one of the few people to actually go out on a limb and defend Kevin Nash and defend the finger poke of doom. Yes, it was WCW being very stupid, but really when you look at the angle by itself and you take away all the Mick Foley stuff and you take away their head-to-head night with Monday Night Raw on that same night and you look at just that angle and only that angle, after all that bullshit that was going on in the NWO, I kind of like to see the original three guys get back together. To me, that was pleasing to see. And as far as them taking a shit on the world title, well, yeah, they kind of did, but WWE took a shit on the European title the year before. Shawn Michaels and Triple H did the exact same fucking thing on a Monday Night Raw to close out in 1997. So it's not like the WWE is above doing anything like that, but this is the world title in WCW, and to treat it like that on the very same night that the WWE is treating their world title very well by giving a hard-working guy who the fans respect his chance to be World Heavyweight Champion, and then on the competition show, their big world title changes hands with a finger on the chest. So, it's just one of WCW's biggest blunders. I mean, if they weren't already dead in the water at that point, that just completely killed them. I don't think they definitely didn't come close to winning in the ratings ever again after that. WWE proved that you can make new guys. WCW was under the impression that the Hogans, the Savages, the Stings, the Lugers, everybody else that's been on top in wrestling for years were the only guys that the fans were going to care about. You could tell that in Tony Schiavone's voice, the tone in his voice when he was giving away the result. That'll put a lot of butts in seats. Fuck you. You don't know what the fuck you're talking about, and you don't know your fucking audience. There's not a person out there, there's not a wrestling fan alive that dislikes Mick Foley in any way, shape, or form. Every single one of us respect him personally and professionally. He's an amazing man, and he deserved what he got that night. And for them to talk about him in a demeaning way and to say, oh, don't tune over to that show because you're going to see this fat fuck win the title. They literally pushed their fans away, I mean, it's just the funniest fucking thing looking back on it. I'm so glad that company lost the war. They just fucking baffled me sometimes. And Eric Bischoff is a shrewd, smart businessman in a lot of ways, but he had complete fucking shit for brains back during these Monday Night Wars. So this was a night, I think, that was one of the most important in the Monday Night Wars. I'm pretty sure they chronicled this in the Monday Night War series that they have on the WWE Network. I'm pretty sure this was one of the ones they did. So anyway, that's it for episode 1, This Day in History. Let me know what you think. Do you guys have any memories of that night? Were you watching Raw or Nitro on that occasion? Did you flip back and forth? Do you remember anything about it? Or were you old enough to remember anything about it? I guess it was 16 years ago now. Holy shit. But if you have any memories about that night you'd like to share, please leave them in the comments below. below. Also, if you have any requests, hey, you got a date on the calendar coming up in a couple of months or a couple of weeks and you want me to talk about an incident that took place, let me know. I'll be happy to take a look at it, and I'll pretty much consider any request because we have an endless amount of shit that I can talk about on these This Day in History episodes pretty much till the end of time. So if you haven't already, go ahead and click over to episode 2, and episode 3 and 4 and 5 will probably be uploaded in just a couple of weeks. So until next time, peace.